The Widowmaker. Some fighter jets earn their nickname from the enemies they kill. This one earned its nickname from the pilots who tried to fly it. The Vought F-7U Cutlass was an American carrier-based fighter developed for the U.S. Navy in the late 1940s. It was tailless, unusually shaped, and mounted on landing gear so tall the pilot sat several meters above the deck when parked. The design was radical for its time and technically ambitious. Almost every aspect of the aircraft turned out to be dangerous. The engines were underpowered. The controls were unresponsive at low speeds. Its difficult low-speed handling made carrier approaches especially hazardous. The Cutlass developed such a deadly reputation that it is often remembered as a Widowmaker. More than a quarter of all F-7U built were destroyed in accidents and approximately 25 pilots were killed. The type disappeared from frontline service before the end of the 1950s. It stands as one of the clearest examples in combat aviation history of an aircraft killed by its own design. The Anteater. Most fighter aircraft have a propeller at the front. This one had a propeller at the front and the back. The German Dornier Do 335 Pfeil was a Second World War heavy fighter designed to solve a specific problem. Twin-engine fighters were faster and more powerful than single-engine ones, but the engines mounted on the wings made them harder to maneuver. Dornier's solution was to mount both engines in the fuselage itself, one driving a propeller at the nose, one driving a second propeller at the tail. The result was an aircraft with the power of a twin-engine fighter and the maneuverability of a single-engine one. German reports credited the Do 335 with a top speed of over 760 kilometers per hour, making it one of the fastest piston-engined aircraft of the war. The pilots who flew it in testing gave it a nickname that survives today. Not the Arrow, which was its official name. They called it the Anteater because of its long tapered fuselage and low-slung nose. Only a handful were completed before the end of the war. A single example survives at the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center, preserved in its original German camouflage. It remains one of the most remarkable push-pull combat aircraft ever flown. Nobody who ever saw it thought it looked like an arrow. They thought it looked like an animal, the corn cob. Not every strategic bomber needs jet engines. Some just need more propellers than you thought possible. The Convair B-36 Peacemaker was an American Cold War bomber built to fly further than any aircraft had ever flown without needing to refuel. To achieve this range, it was fitted with 6 enormous piston engines driving pusher propellers on the trailing edge of the wings, and 4 supplementary jet engines mounted in pods underneath. In flight, the crew referred to the aircraft as 6 turning and 4 burning. Fully loaded, it could weigh around 190 tons with a wingspan just over 70 meters. Approximately 385 were constructed. Individual missions occasionally approached or exceeded 40 hours in the air. Extraordinary endurance for any combat aircraft. It never dropped a bomb in combat. Operational service ended in 1958, and the final B-36 flight took place in 1959 when an aircraft was delivered to a museum. It remains the largest piston-engined combat aircraft ever built by anyone. The Ghost Wing. Some aircraft look ahead of their time. This one looked ahead by 70 years. The German Horten Ho 229 was a flying wing fighter developed by the Horten brothers in the last years of the Second World War. It had no fuselage, no tail, no vertical stabilizers. Its entire structure was a single swept-back wing carrying 2 jet engines buried inside it. In shape, it was almost identical to the American B-2 stealth bomber that would enter service half a century later. Several prototypes and incomplete airframes were produced during the program. The V-1 flew as a glider. The jet-powered V-2 crashed during its 3rd test flight. American forces captured the unfinished V-3 in 1945, and it is now preserved by the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center. Reimar Horten later claimed that charcoal had been incorporated into the aircraft to absorb radar waves, but Smithsonian investigators found no physical evidence of the alleged radar-absorbing coating. Its flying wing shape has led to comparisons with later stealth aircraft, although claims that it was intentionally stealthy remain disputed to this day. What is certain is that it existed, and that no other aircraft of the 1940s looked anything like it. The Skimmer. What if a fighter jet could land on water? The Convair F-2Y Sea Dart tried to answer that question, and the answer was more complicated than anyone expected. The Sea Dart was an American experimental fighter developed in the early 1950s to explore whether jet aircraft could operate from the sea, launching and landing on water using retractable hydroskis mounted underneath the fuselage. It was a delta-wing jet with all the aggression of a modern fighter and none of the landing gear. In tests, the aircraft successfully took off from and landed on water at speeds of over 200 kilometers per hour. During testing, one Sea Dart exceeded Mach 1 in a shallow dive, making it the only seaplane known to have passed the sound barrier. The program was cancelled in 1957 after aircraft carrier design improved to the point where sea-based takeoff was no longer necessary. 5 test aircraft were constructed, although not all of them flew. In 1954, one broke apart during a public demonstration, killing its pilot. Several surviving airframes are preserved in museums today, the only jet fighters in history that could land on water using skis. The Duck. Most fighter aircraft have the wings in the middle and the stabilizers at the back. This one had the stabilizers at the front and the wings at the back. The Japanese Kyushu J-7W Shinden was a canard fighter developed in the last months of the Second World War. Its main wings were mounted near the rear of the fuselage. Its horizontal stabilizers were small forewings mounted directly behind the cockpit. Its engine was buried in the middle of the fuselage, driving a large pusher propeller at the tail. The design was radical, aerodynamically ambitious, and completely backwards, compared to every other fighter in service. In theory, the arrangement gave the aircraft a higher top speed and better maneuverability. 2 prototypes were completed. The first made only 3 brief flights, totaling about 45 minutes, while the second never flew. Although the Japanese Navy had already ordered the Shinden into production, the war ended before mass production could begin. One surviving example sits in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum today. It looks less like a fighter aircraft and more like a fighter aircraft that has been assembled by someone who had never seen one. The Skimmer. Some aircraft are famous for their speed. This one is famous for its noise. The Republic XF-84H Thunderscreech was an American experimental turboprop fighter developed in the mid-1950s. It was designed to combine the speed of a jet engine with the fuel efficiency of a propeller, using a turbine engine to drive an enormous propeller whose tips exceeded the speed of sound at cruising RPM. The result was one of the loudest aircraft ever built. Reports at the time claimed the noise generated by the supersonic propeller tips could be heard many kilometers away, and nearby personnel complained of headaches and nausea. One ground crew member was reportedly said to have suffered a seizure from prolonged exposure. Some military test pilots reportedly refused to fly it, leaving much of the testing to Republic's own pilot, Hank Baird. The program was cancelled after only 12 test flights across 2 prototypes, 11 of which ended in emergency landings. The Thunderscreech was retired quickly and quietly, remembered as the aircraft that succeeded at exactly what it was designed to do and was found to be intolerable to be near. The Blade. Every list has one entry surrounded by one of aviation history's stranger stories. The Northrop XP-79B was an American experimental interceptor developed during the Second World War. It used an unusual welded magnesium alloy structure and a reinforced leading edge along its swept wings. Those 2 features gave rise to a persistent story that the aircraft was designed to attack enemy bombers by flying directly through them, using the reinforced wings to slice the target apart. The Air Force itself describes the ramming role as rumored. The aircraft was also intended to carry conventional guns, and whether the ramming mission was ever official has never been fully confirmed. What is certain is what happened next. A single prototype was built. It took off successfully on its first flight in September 1945. Something went wrong at low altitude, and the aircraft entered a flat spin from which it never recovered. It crashed into the desert, killing test pilot Harry Crosby. The program was cancelled immediately. It remains one of the strangest fighter concepts of the war, whose real purpose is still argued about today. The Valkyrie. The final aircraft on this list was neither a failure nor a success. It was an aircraft that arrived too late to matter and too advanced for its intended purpose. The North American XB-70 Valkyrie was designed in the late 1950s as a strategic bomber capable of flying at Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, at altitudes above 21 kilometers, where its designers hoped speed and altitude would make interception extraordinarily difficult. Fully loaded, it weighed more than 240 tons and measured over 56 meters long. Its wings had drooping tips that folded downward in flight to trap the shockwave beneath the aircraft and use it for additional lift. It looked less like a bomber and more like a piece of science fiction that someone had accidentally built. Only 2 were ever completed. In June 1966, during a formation photography flight organized for a General Electric promotional shoot, An F-104 flying alongside the second Valkyrie collided with it in mid-air. Both aircraft were destroyed and 2 pilots were killed. The program survived the accident briefly, then was cancelled entirely when advances in surface-to-air missiles made high-altitude bombing obsolete. The surviving Valkyrie was flown to the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Ohio in 1969. It has remained there ever since, one of the largest and fastest experimental aircraft ever built. If you want to see more strange machines from history, subscribe to Odd Machines and let us know in the comments which one of these you would actually want to fly.